Thank you, Lumina. And hi, everyone. I'm Louis. I'm really excited to be here. So this is just a one pager to all my socials. So like Lumina said, I am a two times Tableau Public Ambassador. I co-lead the Singapore Tableau user group, so I know how much logistic goes behind, arranging and organizing all these user groups. So kudos to Lumina and Alexander. Um, I also co-lead the community project Games Night Viz. So if you've been around the community, you might have seen this project. It's about video games. And earlier this year, I actually started a YouTube channel diving into all the kind of behind the scenes of all the Viz of the days and really cool, amazing Vizes on Tableau Public. And what's interesting is this month we're having a Christmas special. So I've interviewed about 20 of the entries from Iron Viz. So if you're interested, you can dial in and check out all this interview. It's usually about 10 to 15 minutes. So it's really kind of short and sweet, and just diving into the author's design processes, their inspiration behind the Viz and all. So it's pretty interesting. So, my topic today is about Iron Viz. So, if you haven't heard what is Iron Viz about, it's a annual data viz competition held by Tableau. So every year they have a theme, and this year it is about entertainment. Last year I think it was something about love or something that makes your heart full. And every year they have kind of like a different theme. So fun fact, I actually interviewed Lindsay Betzazol, which is one of the Tableau visionary, and I got to know from her that IMVs used to be a 3 qualifier competition back in 2012. So you will have like 3 different topics throughout the year to participate, and it's probably a lot more taxing and harder to get into top 10. But at least this time round we have only just one qualifier at the end of the year, which is October. um so if you're interested to know more, you can head over to Tableau blog and explore all 191 IMVs entries this year. They're going to announce the top 10 um entries in January. So if you're interested, you can dial into that one as well. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more on the design portion. So in terms of judging criteria, for IMVis, there's actually 3 structures to it. There's the design, analysis, and storytelling. But today I'm just covering just the design part, right? And I mean, just looking at the text over here, you might be a little bit confused or kind of overwhelmed of how many judging criteria there are. So I'm going to try to compress and make it a little bit more accessible for everyone. So how you can think about design judging criteria in IMVis is all about intentional design. So what I mean by intentional design is actually just 3 pillars, right? Accessibility, readability, and the meaning of your viz, right? So in terms of accessibility, it's all about looking at whether your viz is colorblind accessible, the palettes that you chose, whether it contrast enough, so people can actually read the text, read the viz. There's also a criteria that requires you to use limited usage of images to convey text. So what they mean by that is you could have, labels of, let's say if we take superstore data as an example, you have all the product names. So they don't want you to have an image for each of the product names. That's one of it. And also font size larger than 12. I know 12 pixels is a bit large for many folks, and I think a lot of us, when we build dashboards and all, it's usually about 10 to 11. But the reason why they have 12 is also for readability, especially when they print out on a large screen and all. It's easier for people to read. Now that's for accessibility. In terms of readability, what this uncovers is about interactivity and your layout. It has to be at the forefront, made for your users. So it has to be user friendly. It has to be purposeful. It has to have instructions on how to actually read your charts. So things like your titles, your subtitles, your captions, and all. Um, And then the chart must be clearly presenting the data. So you shouldn't be, I mean, some people use very complex charts, but they don't explain how to actually read the charts. So those would definitely score a little bit lower on the judging criteria. So if you are introducing a complex chart, just make sure that you explain it fully for your users. And then the last portion is all about the meaning of your visits. So the visual elements in your charts should add to the overall understanding of visualization rather to distract, and all the charts should contribute to the overall story. So all in all, what you want to do is just 4 points to take away: accessible colors, readable charts, right charts for the right data, and the flow of your story, right? So today I'm going to talk a little bit on my Iron Viz entry this year, and how I actually came about the idea. So when I first started, or when I first saw the theme, entertainment, I was really excited because there's so many angles you can take with entertainment. You can be movies, can be TVs, can be video games. And one of the ideas that I got from my wife was a bit more obscure, which was about dark entertainment. So my wife works as a police officer, so she deals with child exploitation. So one of the initial ideas that I had was to see how I could get data to raise awareness around the rise of child exploitation. But unfortunately, a lot of this data is really hard to find, or could be kept by federal bureaus that you is not accessible to the public. So I kind of ditched the idea because I couldn't find the data for it. The next idea I had was to look at the Data Plus TV movie set, data set, and see if I could find an idea. And one of the TV shows that I grew up when I was child with was Power Rangers. So if anyone knows Power Rangers, you know that Jason David Frank, who plays the Green Ranger and the White Ranger, unfortunately passed away a couple of years back. But he was such an instrumental character in my childhood that I wanted to do kind of like a tribute to him. But then again, I was thinking between this and child exploitation, it's a little bit dark for entertainment. So I didn't want to go down that route. So what I've ended up doing was a kind of like a history with video games. So it's more of a personal story rather than something that's out in the wild. And that's how I actually started with the idea. So with this idea, I needed to start with a skeleton, how I'm structuring the entire Viz. And this was, I started off with this grand idea of me sitting in front of the couch and playing video games. And the centerpiece of my Viz would be kind of like a trophy showcase at the back and kind of summary matrix of how much I spent, how many games I played, and the respective playtime hours. The plan was then to kind of stretch it down in a long form infographic that kind of talks about gaming in different phases of my life and kind of ending with a reflection of my life against industrial trends and future. But I think this idea wasn't too far from my final product, but I kind of needed to refine it a little bit more. So the first problem I had was images, and I knew that one of the judging criteria was for design was the limited use of images to replace text. So I visited an idea from my previous life where I kind of dabbled a little bit in video games development. So this is a Pokemon-inspired character sprite sheet that was created by my buddy back when we were kind of like a two-man inspiring team who wanted to make a game. The first two characters in this sheet is basically me and my best friend. And the initial idea was that I could refactor this and create adaptation of my character for the different sections of my life phase. So I'll probably have like a few younger versions of myself in early stages of life. But I also knew that this would take me forever to create, and I only had 1 month. So, well, I mean, less than that because October was a really busy time for me at work. So I ended up only having 2 to 3 weeks of time to work on my Iron Viz. But that's the thing about Iron Viz. With the limited time frame, you really got to pick your battles. And I knew that data collection would be a much tedious process, so I didn't want to spend too much time on this. So my one advice to everyone is that you should push yourself, but at the same time, you need to be realistic and ground yourself within your limits. So now that I knew that I didn't have time to draw variants of myself, that also meant that I wouldn't have time to draw all the game titles and the trophy showcase. So I started to do a little bit of research to see how I could thematically tie my story to video games. And I kept coming back to the console and TV idea. And this is a simplified mood board of what I found early in my brainstorming. And I knew that I wanted to go pixel art style because of how much oh, sorry. I'm so sorry, guys. I actually didn't share my screen. Thank you, Nikita, for saying that. Yeah, so maybe I'll just jump back quickly on this. So this was the one that I was talking about, intentional design. Sorry again for not sharing my screen. And then this was the initial skeleton that I had, with me sitting in front of the couch and the trophy showcase behind me. And then this was the sprite sheet that I was talking about. Like, me and my friend actually created this, and I wanted to do younger versions of myself, but it took way too long to actually do it. And then this is the mood board. So in terms of the mood board, I knew I wanted to go pixel art style because of how much of my childhood was forged with those games. So I started to draw my own fonts as well, based on the typography found in some of the older games. But I ended ditching the whole letter vectors because it was too much work. And I went with a readily available free font to save some time. So again, pick your battles. So the first major art piece that I did for my Viz was the console. And it was really hard because I went with a perspective view that shows it in a 3D plane rather than have it in a 2D flat surface. So you can see from the left wireframe, each of the shapes were drawn separately, merged, and transformed in very precise pixel points. But I also knew that if I couldn't get this to look right, the rest of the Viz would kind of fall flat. So this was really a make or break for me in terms of the thematic design. The next one was a TV. So with a console, I also needed a TV to hook it up with. But thankfully, this is a lot easier. I didn't need to have two perspective drawing because the TV screen could kind of sit in a 2D plane. I did, however, spend a little bit more time adding some textural gradients, shadowing work, and adding a little bit concave curves to make it look a bit more retro. And this ended up being my centerpiece of the Viz. The crazy thing was that I even wanted to draw 5 to 6 different variants of this to represent the gaming console of the years, and having the cartridges reflect as much. So you have like a assortment of floppy disks, CDs, mini cartridges, and more. But this is also where I put myself back and ask this question: does this image distract or guide your users? Because when you're thinking about user experience, also have to think about their cognitive load. Are you expecting them to remember too much things to understand your Viz? And also, for someone who doesn't play video games, would they even get these subtle references? But yeah, I mean, those were my thoughts running through my mind when I was building this. And my decision was to make it more coherent, and to make sure that I started and ended the same way, which is why you see a TV screen at the top and at the bottom. And what I did was also an additional step to make sure everything tied in thematically, and that was to have the controller wires weave through the different sections of the Viz and it right next to the final TV screen. Now, before I go ahead and show you the final Viz, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about my intentional designs. So one of the experiences I wanted to impart to my audience was the fun of video games. And I achieved it using two methods. The first was having a random function to randomly place the cartridges around the console, kind of imitating how I would have scattered my game disc on the floor when I was a kid. The other fun aspect was to let the audience change the cartridge in the console, because I remember as a kid that was always exciting when I bought a new game and switch it out. Last but not least, I needed a visual feedback to tie everything together. So I played around to add that scrolling animation in. It's heavily inspired by Ant Pulley's microscope Viz on ants, and it did take me quite a while iterating through the different directions and getting animations to work on Tableau Public, because it can get a little iffy when you have complex calculations. But long story short, to do this in Tableau, you need a combination of parameters and calculated fields that re-aggregate your data points, which means you can't do it in the dataset itself. So those were the fun parts. And those probably took about 70 to 80% of completion of my entire Viz. I went through a lot of feedback from other folks in the community as well as the feedback initiative organized by Sarah Bartlett. And it's really game-changing, because sometimes when you're too deep in your Viz, you become very tunnel vision and you can't really see what doesn't work. So I would recommend for anyone attempting Iron Viz next year, sign up for that. You won't regret it. So I love colors, but I also know that it can be the most distracting thing in a visualization. So I made a decision early on to use just one color, which I eventually decided on green because it represents calmness, and that was the emotion I was trying to convey on how video gaming makes me feel. But the problem with one color is I'm very limited in terms of visual hierarchy. So I had to use it very strategically for title callouts and essential takeaways. But I also use a heavy emphasis by a green box background to add one more layer of visual hierarchy to my titles. So this plum pulling chart is a bit interesting. And one of the feedback I got earlier on was the readability of this chart. And I was thinking that since this is a part of my centerpiece, it needed to be right. So what I ended up doing was that it took a lot of experimentation, but I introduced a new shape and neutralized the colors to create more contrast. And the one trick that I always use is to kind of stand a distance from your Viz and just squint at it. So if you squint at it and you can still make up distinction and read the charts, then it's good enough. This was another one that I pondered for quite a long time, because I wanted to show the separate consoles, but also show them collectively. But it really boils down to the insight I was trying to bring across, which is the overall numbers. So what I ended up doing was not to introduce new colors, but just use a neutral monochromatic palette and kind of subtly bordered up the bars with green so I can visually connect it back to the big picture. Another stumbling block that I had was making this scatter plot readable, because it's the main tool of my storytelling, right? And the problem is with scatter plots is that if you don't design them properly, it's really hard to read in terms of like the density and the distribution of it. When I first started with this particular marginal chart, I was being a bit lazy, so I actually took the yellow star emoji and kind of just put it in the description at the top. And the problem with that was that I wanted that to reflect all the green dots in the chart, but it was a different item. So it makes it very hard for people to visually connect both of them. So what I did was I added the Unicode instead so that I could color the star in green, as well as adding a border for each of the shapes so that it kind of creates that distinction between the different points, and the stars actually pop up a little bit more. So the stars are actually the games that are tagged as must play by Metacritic, which is a body that does kind of rating for all video games. So that was kind of the field that I was going for. So all in all, when I'm doing my design, I always think about how I want to bring my audience on a story journey, right? So when I started this Viz, you remember the whole skeleton that I had at the top. I needed to refine that a little bit more. So I wanted to start off with a introduction, right? So the introduction will talk about what is gaming, what are the 5 life phases that I'm going through in my life, and then I wanted to show kind of like the end point first, right? So giving people, the audience, a summary of how gaming has impacted all of my life phases, and then adding additional context to it. So you always start with kind of like the big picture, and then you kind of zoom in a little bit on, how much I spent, what are games I played, how much I played, and so on and so forth. And then we go into the deep dive where you have a lot more information for your audience to consume, right? Um, and then we always need to kind of bring the users back to kind of ground them again, because when you introduce more and more information, you always need to bring them back to the original story. And then finally, the future in gaming. So with all that, before I show you the Viz, this is kind of like a cheat sheet. So if you want, you can, save this down. So what I usually do when I'm designing dashboards or designing, Iron Viz entries and stuff like that, is I think about the 4 points that I talked about early on. So accessible colors, so neutralize as much as I can, and just sticking to minimum colors. Only add colors when you really need it. Using the main colors to draw attention, but you can experiment with different weights. So things like bold, italics, larger font size, smaller font size, those are things that you can play around with to build visual hierarchy. You want to make sure that your charts are readable. So using colors and shapes to differentiate points, using annotations, labels, parameters to leverage visual hierarchy. You want to choose the right charts for the right data, or right data for the right charts. So what you don't want to do is to flood your users with too much insight. So each chart should probably only have like 1 to 2 insights, and that's probably the limit of people's attention span. And then your flow of your story. So the flow of story is always important when you're building something especially big for Iron Viz. So you want to start big and break into smaller pieces, and then kind of end where it started. So with that, let me just stop this, and I can show you how this whole Viz looks like, right? So this is the final Viz that I submitted for Iron Viz, right? So over here, you have a summary of what video games is, and then just a description of what all of the different phases of my life is. And over here, you have the centerpiece of my visualization. So this is the console that I've drawn in Figma. So you can see over here, you have all these different cartridges that you can actually click, and it scrolls the TV console. Let's see. And it's not loading. Yeah, okay. So there we go. So if you click on like the different portion, you can see that the cartridges actually change position. This was the randomness that I added to the x-axis to kind of shift it a little bit more. But basically this allows me to add a little bit more fun for my audience. So you can have that scrolling effect, and you see that the cartridges actually change whenever you click on a different one. So for example, now this is the summary. If you click on this changes to the different cartridges as well. So that was something fun that I wanted to do. And the thematic design of it is that you can see that all of this, you have these wires that go around the different sections. So if I scroll down quickly a little bit, you can see it kind of encapsulates the different sections, and finally ending with the controller, which is what you play the video games with, and then the final piece. So I've started off my Viz with the plum pudding chart showing how much time I spent playing games. And I also ended the Viz with a plum pudding chart showing the number of hours I could potentially play games in the future based on the average that I've played in the past. So that was my way of kind of tying the start and the end of the Viz. Um, and then we scroll up here, all right, you have all these different pieces that adds additional context to the Viz itself. So you have like how much I spent. So you see, how I've used visual hierarchy, and it's all very monochromatic. So I've just used green as my main color throughout my Viz, and as I needed to bring additional focus, I've just changed the color. I've added a green box to add a little bit more weight to it, and then even for this one. So in terms of giving my audience, kind of training my audience to uh, play around and view my visualization a little bit better, what I did here was that I added a little Easter egg. So just saying that, guess what happens when you include everything, right? And this is just the outliers, because in my gaming history, what I realized was there is essentially like a good 10 games throughout my life that kind of skews the entire playtime of the whole thing. So if I include it, you can see that over here, I have just one game that I've played for almost a year, 240 days. But it kind of compresses all of the other games down. So I wanted them to have a feel of, what would happen if you exclude and include outliers, so that when you scroll down to the different sections at the bottom, you would know exactly what you need to do when you're interacting with this chart. And I intentionally use a scatter plot because I wanted everything to start and end the same way. So over here, you can see that this scatter plot shows all the different phases. You have the birth of the gamer, which is when I was 7 years old, all the way until now, where I'm 40 years old with playing with two daughters and stuff like that. And if you scroll to the next section, you can see the same structure with a scatter plot. And over here, I've labeled specifically the birth of the gamer, the first two phases of my life. And this basically kind of zooms in with that specific story for these two phases. And you have this same kind of parameter that you can actually switch to exclude or include outliers. And this allows them a bit of exploration, but with the same kind of visual hierarchy that you built in the previous section. And then over here, you have one whole section just on this phase, because this one, you can see that I intentionally put it as including of all games, because I wanted to show that huge contrast of this particular game in this section of my life. But if you go down to here, you can see the same thing, but I've excluded the outliers. So you can actually still use the outliers, but it brings a different spectrum to the story itself, right? So you have like these three different main sections, and I've tried to kind of compress it to a story of each own, so that it's more coherent as you kind of go through the different sections, and just ending it with how many games I can play in the future. So this is a kind of like in a nutshell of the entire Viz and my thought processes on how I actually created this. If anyone has any question, I'm more than happy to talk about this. Oops, let me see. Oh, there we go.
Thank you very much. So, what was the most challenging part of creating this Viz? Building an idea, layout, what was the most challenge?
That's a very good question. I would say the data collection and creation of the console and the TV was the hardest part. Because I think data collection is a bit tricky, because digital footprints only existed probably after 2018. So when I was 7 years old, there wasn't any kind of like a digital account or like Steam account that you can log in and see how many hours you clocked. So I had to manually find all the old consoles that I had and try to revive them. For those games that I couldn't find any data, I could use kind of aggregates from other players' gaming hours, because what I found was I've looked at the past 4 or 5 years. I have kind of compared my gaming hours against other people, and it's usually about 10 to 20% difference. So it's still fairly close. So for those games that I don't have data, I kind of use the community benchmark.
Great.
So how many hours did I spend on this dashboard? I would say, or let me think. Easily, I spent about 5 to 6 hours a day for 2 weeks. So yeah, that's that's a lot, because there was a lot of data cleaning as well, and creation of all the assets.
Maybe some advice for those who want, who will be participate next year or something. What you will done differently, maybe, or something.
So I think if you are thinking about submitting a Iron Viz entries, what I've seen in, because I was a qualifier judge last year, so as judges we have to adhere by the 3 pillars of judging criteria. So you have like the design, the analysis, and storytelling. So try your best to adhere to the judging criteria that is listed out on by Tableau, and you'll be safe. But what I've found also is anything that has kind of like a personal story that makes people feel different tends to have kind of higher scores, as opposed to something that is just factual. Like if you look at superstore data, okay, the West sold how many, the East sold how many. Those are very factual description, but it doesn't kind of urge you to do more with the data. So always think about what now for your users. What can they do with the information? Or is there something that, oh, I didn't know that the data is in this manner, and that's usually something that is brought through with personal stories, I feel.
Okay, personal is okay. Okay.
So, Titanic work. Luis, thank you very much for this inspiring session and for your work and dedication, and very interesting and amazing.
Thank you.
So, guys, if you'd like to learn more or stay updated on Luis's work, be sure to follow him on LinkedIn and join our Cyprus Tableau user group on LinkedIn. So thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Lumina. Thank you, Alexander.